Hey YouTubers, it's Charlie. So the Deadpool writers have already started talking about Deadpool and Cable, the sequel, Cable's character, how it's all going to work out. So this is going to be a big explainer. And I'll explain a little bit about who Cable is, because he's a really cool character that just hasn't been in the movies yet. Careful for spoilers from the Deadpool movie if you haven't seen it yet. I'm just going to talk a little bit about stuff during that. This is mostly going to be about the sequel and stuff that the writers have been saying. At the end of the Deadpool movie, he does this big Ferris Bueller's Day Off end tag scene where he teases that Cable is going to be the sequel. And true to form, they are actually writing Cable into the sequel. They've started to explain, because everybody understands that Cable's going to be in it. It's not a secret. They've said things that you would expect them to say. In order to keep the next movie relatable, it's still going to be small, relatively self-contained. Yes, Cable is a time traveler, but it's not going to take place 1,000 years in the future during Age of Apocalypse or anything like that. Visually, the time period will just pick up sometime after the first Deadpool movie. It'll be during modern day, so it sounds like the budget is going to be relatively similar to what the previous movie was. They might give him a little extra money for some special effects, but part of the reason why Deadpool was so funny, why the movie was so funny, is because of the things that they could not do. Like, oh, it's almost like the studio couldn't afford more X-Men. Those are some of the best jokes in the film, because they were completely honest. They did not have more money to get more X-Men. So production-wise, even though Deadpool and Cable, which is what I'm going to call the sequel for now, is going to look almost the exact same as the first movie, that doesn't mean that they're just going to rehash the exact same jokes. Just expect the same type of energy. Really, the new wrinkle is Cable and how his character changes the tone of the film. Because if you've never read Cable, you don't know anything about his character. He's like the polar opposite of Deadpool. Deadpool doesn't take anything seriously. Cable takes everything super seriously. Cable is always trying to fight the end of the world, so he has zero sense of humor, so you already see where some of the comedy comes from, in the fact that he's forced to deal with Deadpool. He needs Deadpool's help, but he also wants to kill him every time he opens his mouth. I've already talked about that New Mutants 98 title the first time Deadpool debuted. He shows up and kills Cable's team, the New Mutants that Cable's been training for the last year. All these badass people, then Cable kills him and mails the body parts, literally mails Deadpool's body parts back to the person that hired Deadpool to kill the New Mutants. When they run into each other for the first time in the Cable and Deadpool comic, when they got their own title together, he immediately splatters Deadpool's brains without even a thought. Imagine the drill sergeant from Full Metal Jacket being forced to team up with Deadpool. That's what Cable and Deadpool is like. But thematically, for those of you that don't understand what's going on with Cable's character, what he's all about, for the most part, it's kind of a Terminator story. There's always somebody in the future, some evil mutant that takes over. During Cable's storyline, that ends up being Strife. Strife is a clone of Cable that as a baby is stolen by Apocalypse and raised to be evil. So he becomes this big villain in the future, and Cable's mission is eventually to take Strife down, to kill himself, essentially. That was actually my first introduction to the Cable character. The big Strife arc happened during Executioner's Song, so you can read that storyline if you want to read all about Strife. But the other big storyline that most people remember Cable from, especially in recent memory, is Messiah Complex. It gets really complicated, but that title really does describe Cable's character. He has a Messiah complex. He's always trying to save mutant kind, but it involves a lot of time travel. So imagine the Terminator movies only done with X-Men characters, where John Connor is Cable, and he's the one jumping around in time trying to save everyone. Now, even though Cable is kind of like the John Connor character, the backstory is quite a bit different. His real name is Nathan Summers, and he's the son of Cyclops and Madeline Pryor. White and Scott Summers wind up getting married to and having a baby with a Jean Grey look-alike. That's already a complicated story by itself. After the Dark Phoenix saga, Cyclops, really sad because he's lost his lover, meets a new woman and falls in love. She just happens to look just like Jean Grey. You can hear the sound of all the comic book readers doing double takes. Eventually they get to boning, and then in the future, Nathan Summers is born. But he gets wrapped up in this big apocalypse storyline with a techno-organic virus, then Strife is spun out of that storyline, but basically that's how Cable came into being. Jean Grey was dead, Cyclops fell in love with a Jean Grey look-alike, they had a baby. When he first appeared in the comics, he debuted in Uncanny X-Men in that title. Then he took the name Cable and appeared in New Mutants. They were a team that Cable was training to fight Strife in the future. But remember, Deadpool shows up, kills a bunch of them, and then in the wake of that, Cable rebuilds the team and rebrands it as X-Force. That became the X-Force comic book. It sold 5 million copies, but remember, that was during the speculator boom. If you guys don't know what that is, or if you're too young to remember it, it was when they could trick you into buying multiple copies of a single story by putting a different cover on the front. Now, because I'm hoping they brand the sequel as Deadpool and Cable, they might do something from the Deadpool and Cable stories. That was basically like Cable's second run. Cable got his own solo series. After that, they paired him up with Deadpool, and that became the Deadpool and Cable comic book. Now, there are a couple of things from the comic book I don't think they're going to be able to do. Like, Cable turns his spaceship, he has this really cool spaceship that he turns into a floating island that's kind of like a new X-Men base. No way the Deadpool movie's going to have enough money to do something like that. But thematically, Cable just tries to use his powers to change the past to make a better future. So in the Cable movie, they might have Cable doing stuff like that. What about the big villain though? Is it going to be like Batman v Superman where they fight each other? There has to be a big bad of the film that is not Cable at a certain point. So if they really want to get crazy, it would be awesome if they did Strife, because you could use the exact same actor, it'd be a little bit cheaper for them, so they could weave in some of the comic book history, but they could make it smaller, more self-contained than their original Executioner song story. The next X-Men film is introducing Apocalypse. Apocalypse is a big part of Cable's backstory. They could connect some of those things, but I think it's still going to be relatively self-contained. They want the big X-Men films to be their own thing, they want Deadpool to be its own thing, even though there is a lot of characters crossing over. In Deadpool making a lot of jokes about X-Men timeline problems. McAvoy or Stewart, so hard to keep track of all the timelines. So whatever they end up doing, just expect it to be a simpler, self-contained version of a Cable storyline from the comics. Let me know in the comments though, what stuff from the comics do you want them to do for the Deadpool sequel? And who do you want to play Cable? I know Stephen Lang has been lobbying for the role. That doesn't mean that he's been cast. They're probably looking at him because he's not a super expensive actor, but he has played a lot of characters that embody qualities that Cable has. Most of you probably know him from the Avatar movie as the villain of that movie. Think of a less evil version of that. That's kind of what Cable's personality is like. Whatever ends up happening, just expect liberal Back to the Future, liberal Terminator jokes. It's going to be so much fun. They haven't announced a release date yet, but because they're already writing the movie, the chances are pretty good they could be finished with it in the next 18 months, depending on how long post-production takes. I don't think they'd be able to turn over a movie in a single year, so I don't think we'll see it before summer of next year, but because it is a smaller film than the X-Men films, they will be able to turn it over faster. My next Deadpool video might be some X-Force related stuff. That's going to be a separate movie all by itself. That'll probably come after the Deadpool sequel because they want to introduce the Cable character, then he can go off and be an X-Force and lead that team just like he did in the comics. But if you have any requests for Deadpool videos, just let me know in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to get everything. There's a new Legends of Tomorrow tonight. Cisco is guest starring from The Flash. I don't know what he's going to be doing, but it's going to be a big Prison Break episode. While you guys wait for me to post that video, you can click here for all my Deadpool Easter eggs, and you can click here to learn all about Guardians of the Galaxy 2. Thank you so much for watching, everybody. Let's high five. Let's go eat some tacos.